Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, welcome. This is Varietal Literature's YouTube page. It's a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And if you're here live, what you can do right now, if you so choose, is join us in the live chat where I always see Lizzie Rose, Tammy Morelli, Witchery, GS, and Jum Store, and surely several more to come. Joining in if you want to discuss the stories and ask me questions and so on as we go along, that is the place to do it. But that's only if you're live. If you're not live, if you're watching this pre-recorded, then down in the description below there are timestamps, and those timestamps let you jump ahead to whichever part interests you. And if you're interested into hearing the tale that's on the icon, the man whale tale, well, surprise, surprise, it's called Man Whale, and it is the last story we're going to be reading today, also our longest. So if you're not watching this live and that's all you came here for, you can feel free to go down to the description and jump ahead to whatever interests you. Tammy got a new place. Congratulations, Tammy. I'm sure moving with a bum shoulder was tough. Witchery remembered what day it is. Always glad to have you, Witchery. And I'll ask before I forget, what teas are we drinking today? Or if you're not drinking tea, what are you drinking? Of course, I'm boring and basic. I'm still just drinking the same Earl Grey. But maybe one day I'll be interesting. Lizzie Rose says, I'm drinking peppermint tea tonight. I don't usually have tea this late, but I have a cold. Oh no. Well, it is anything but a cold here. It is very muggy and lots of rain. And I see Zombie Wolf has joined us. Oh, good. Good to see you, Zombie Wolf. Now we can finally get started. I kid. All right. What are we going to do tonight? Well, we are going to read the rest of the story. Elves was the ones from Icelandic lore, and I think it shows. They're sort of a little more human-like, a little more like greatest builders of items, magic items, and whatever else, and quite pretty and all of that. They're more that way than like Celtic fairies, which are like small little angry men. I'm hearing complaints about buffering. Unfortunately, there's not really much I can do about buffering. Let me see. Hopefully whatever it's doing gets over it. Let me double check. Gia says you're back and you're fine. Yeah, but usually buffering is a continuous problem. I will be honest, buffering is usually a problem on YouTube's side, and there's not really much I can do about it. Let's see what it says about stream health. It says I'm getting a good bit rate out, so let's hope that that doesn't keep happening, but it very well could. All right. Well, buffering aside, I'm not going to blab. I will say that today I suspect will go a little bit shorter, but I've been wrong before. The last tale is the longest tale. We have 2 short tales and then 1 longer tale. I'm guessing we're going to come in like 30 or 40 minutes, but the last episode went long, so together, collectively, I have delivered 2 episodes. Okay. Well, I mean, that's it. We're doing Icelandic elves. They're not like the elves that we see in, Disney movies or whatever else, or Celtic fairy tales, or even German folklore for the most part. They are the human-sized magical mystery creatures, though they do have similarities in that they're sort of chaotic in their intentions. Gia says, no, Rory, wrong question? What? All right. Well, I'm just going to go on with our story and hope that all of this works. I don't know what's going on in the chat. Oh, Gia says you've been wrong before. Yeah, I think I'm wrong at least once a stream about something. If nothing else, pronunciation. Which we're going to briefly discuss here for a moment. I will repeat that. Lucy Rose says, I'm only upset about the buffering because I missed what Rory was saying. It's nothing that valuable, don't worry. I didn't say anything that interesting. Okay. Our first story comes to us from Jan Arneson's Icelandic Legends, which is a classic book collection of Icelandic folklore from the 19th century. Yeah, 19th century. And the first story we're reading from it is called Blue Face. And I'm going to repeat what I said before. While I do look up pronunciations ahead of time and I do put some effort into trying to figure them out, Icelandic really slips my tongue a lot. So if you are Icelandic, feel free to skip this as I stumble through your beautiful language. This story is called Blue Face. It happened once that a farmer's daughter in the East Country was lost. Though great search was made for her, was never found. Her parents were overwhelmed with grief, and the farmer went into the house of a priest who was deemed wiser than his neighbors, and who received them kindly. Listening attentively to the man's account of his misfortune and to his request for help to find out whether his daughter were living or dead, the priest told him that the girl had been stolen by elves. Nor would seeing her again be any pleasure to you. But the father could not think this, so fond had he been of his daughter, but urged the priest over and over again to aid him in getting her back. At length, the latter, worn out by continual entreaties, agreed to do so, and appointed an evening on which the farmer should come to his house. At the appointed time, the farmer repaired to the priest's dwelling, who, as soon as the rest of his household had retired to bed, led him out of the house to where a horse was standing, ready, ready saddled. The priest mounted the horse, and making the farmer mount behind him, put spurs on the steed, and they rode away. After they'd ridden for a time, the priest knew not how long, they came to the sea. Over which the horse galloped as if it had been dry land. And at last they came to some high rocks which rose sheer from the sea, and upon which the waves dashed. Under these the priest guided the horse until they saw before them an opening like the door of a house, into which the peasant looked and could perceive a bright light, and many people hurrying to and fro. Among them was a woman whose face was pale blue, and who had upon her forehead a white cross. Then the priest asked the peasant how he admired this woman. "Not at all," said he, and the priest answered, "That is your daughter. I can, if you will, get her back again for you. But I warn you that on account of her having lived with the elves and through the force of their strange arts, her nature has been changed. She's a wild one, like them." The peasant said, "Neh, Let us return at once. My heart does not yearn towards her. And so they returned over the sea. And their fleet horse took them home again, ere any knew of their departure. All right. There's our first story about abandoning your daughter because her face is blue. I will admit, like, sometimes I can kind of intuit the point of a story or whatever else. But this one I read almost entirely because I have no idea what is going on here. She obviously is being marked with the Christian cross. She obviously is like somewhat warded and protected, but not enough that the priest sees her as a soul worth saving. I don't know. I do find it interesting on a metaphorical level that the blue face is never explained, but they ride across the sea, and it feels like a sort of metaphorical description of somebody being drowned. But I don't know. I might be reaching. The next one is also a bit odd. It's also short. After this one, we'll get to the longer man whale one, which will be our last story of the night. But first, I'm going to have a bit of tea. Lizzie Rose says, does he want his daughter back or not? Jeez, yeah. That was the same thought I had. I gotta ask my parents, if my face was blue, would they abandon me to the elves? All right, our next story also comes to us from Jon Arnarsson's Icelandic Legends, and it's called The Bishop and the Elves, and it's also a bit of an odd one. A bishop traveling to visit various parts of the diocese. For this, as took with him among other servants, as was the custom in those times, for this was a long time ago, a maid servant to cook his meals for him. One evening he rested and caused the tents to be pitched, the camp for the night to be made upon a certain mountain. Now the next morning he found the maid was missing. Search was made high and low, far and wide for her, but all in vain, and the bishop shrewdly suspected that she had been stolen by the elves. Now he had in his retinue of servants a certain man who, from his great stature and strength, went by the name John the Giant. And accordingly he called John the Giant to him and said, "Sit here upon my bed, while I go out and do not stir for an instant from this tent. If it should happen that the maid come in, seize her and hold her fast. And above all things, do not let her go till I return, however much she may struggle, and however much she may beg. Take care, too, how you believe what she says, for to deceive you into leaving her free, she will not stick at a lie." With these words, the bishop took his staff, and going out, drew it with it 3 circles, one within the other, on the ground outside of the tent, and went away without anybody seeing in what direction. Meanwhile, John the Giant sat upon the bed and waited, listening and looking intently, but moving neither hand nor foot. And after a little while, the maid who'd been lost appeared near the tent without any shoes upon her feet, and running into it went up to the pillow of the bishop's bed as if to get something from underneath it. But John the Giant was too quick and held her tight. At first she begged to let her go, saying that the bishop had sent her, and that she must make haste back to him again. Then, as soon as she saw that John the Giant turned a deaf ear to all her entreaties, she did not believe or care for a word she said. She began to struggle and fought so sturdily that it was almost more than even John the Giant could handle, and hold her still. Just at this time, the other servants outside saw 12 mounted men dressed in blue ride towards the tent, stopping suddenly as if they had been shot. And when they came to the circles which were drawn around it, immediately vanishing away. For these were the magic circles which Bishop had made with his holy staff, and nothing evil or ungodly could pass beyond them. So, not to break up the story, but if that's true, why, when you make tents, would you not just go draw these 3 circles every time? You wouldn't run into these problems, Bishop. Soon afterwards, the bishop himself returned and told his serving men to bind the maid until such time as her temper should be less perverse. Then he again went away, and before long the girl came to her own good senses again. When the others saw this, they asked her to tell them what had befallen her, and how she had left the camp without awakening anybody. She declared that in the night, a man had come to her bedside, taken her hand and led her out. She, not knowing why or whither they were going till they came to a certain mound in which they entered. That here she found a great many people assembled in a large hall, at the end of which was a raised dais, with many women collected together upon it. That these women had made her go to bed, and placed her couch beside her couch a spinning wheel and a bundle of hemp, bidding her spin it when she awoke. But, she said, in the morning the bishop, with his staff in hand, came to my bedside and bade me run back here, fetch his keys from under his pillow. I rose and ran in such haste that I had not even time to put on my shoes, pointing towards her bare little feet. And this was the end of the matter. The bishop came back soon afterwards, not ill-pleased with his morning's work, for being a pretty well skilled in magic and the like, and being moreover a very holy man, and right determined one to boot. He had played the elves a pretty trick that day, in getting his maidservant out of their hands almost as soon as they had gotten her into theirs. And as far as that went, he could have done it 100 times just as easily as once, and in a different way each time. Zombie Wolf says, well, that has a simple answer, Rory, because then the plot wouldn't happen. I mean, I guess you could just say he forgot. Witchery says, I don't know, a lot of these plots barely exist. I say we throw him into the well for being useless anyways. I mean, he's useful. He just has no foresight, apparently. I do find the renditions of holy men as sort of priests and whatever in these stories so interesting, because in our minds, I think in modern times, when you think of a priest, you think of a person in a church who, you know, maybe has some prayer beads, passes out some, you know, biscuits and wine, and that's about it. But they resemble more like shaman in these stories, right? Like they have like magic special superpowers and wards and whatever else. They're more like D&D clerics than they are a modern priest. And I find that interesting. I mean, I guess one theory you could take with that is that maybe these are retellings of stories of a time when there was a more, you know, pre-Christian pagan aesthetic to the holy men, who were thought to have magic. Or maybe that's just, and this is equally possible, as much as that first idea is probably pretty popular with my audience. It is also the case that just having knowledge was considered kind of a magic trick, in those days, and that's one of the reasons why we talked about this in the I can't think of his name. Faust. We talked about this in the Faust video I did like a year ago. That a lot of Faust was a real person, and a lot of what informs the belief that Faust sold his soul to the devil was just that he was a very learned man. You know, university folk and knowledge were seen suspiciously as being kind of magic tricks. Witchery says this man would never survive a D&D crawl. Probably not. All right. Well, it's time to learn about the man whale. In the comments last week, specifically Uncle Kitty was quite disappointed we didn't get to the man whale, so that was part of my motivation to read it this week. I want to ask the chat up front, though, what's your theory on how the man became a whale? Because the story's about that, but I'm curious what your predictions are as to how you become a whale. All right. Let's... Oops. Jump Store says, well, see, Rory, when a man and a whale love each other very, very much. Man, I wish that was what the story was. I'm sorry to say it's not that. That's way too heavy rain. Let's go light rain. Okay, a little bit more tea. Oh, Witchery guessed it. It's Mr. Magoo. New Selkie just dropped. I have never read a Selkie story on stream, and I'll tell you why. They are a fascinating, fascinating piece. At least I think I never have. Maybe I did, like, years ago. They're a fascinating piece of folklore. However, they are content warning red flag factories. I think at the end of the day, they're ultimately critical of the kind of things that you would have to give content warnings on, but they're brutal. Yeah, I think I might have read one once, either last year or the year before around Halloween. They're all pretty disturbing. Gia says you did. Yeah, I kind of remember a Norwegian one where the man kind of murders everybody. And then, for those who don't know, I guess, before I carry on in this story, a Selkie is like a spirit, a fae spirit at the ocean side, who appears as like a seal. And they take off their seal skin and leave it by the ocean side and come and walk and look like a very beautiful woman. And the story goes that if you steal her Selkie skin and lock it away, she is like bound to be your wife. They are at their basis about abusive relationships. They're not particularly positive about it either, so I think that's sort of the intention of it as a metaphorical object. I remember there's this one guy that my friend and I knew in university, and he was a jerk. No one liked him. And then one day he got married to just the sweetest, nicest woman. And so we always said that he must have found her Selkie skin. Which is a mean thing to say, but he was a mean person. Okay. Our last story of the night is the man whale, where we figure out how the man became a whale. It also comes to us from Jan Arnesson's Icelandic legends. In ancient times, in the south part of the country, it was the custom to go in a boat at a certain season of the year from the mainland to the cliffs. Geirfu Glaskir, procure seabirds and the eggs which they were in the habit of laying there. The passage to these rocks was always looked upon as an unsafe one, as they stood some way out at sea and constant and heavy surf beat upon them. It happened once that some men went thither in a boat at the proper season for the purpose, as the weather seemed to promise a long calm. And when they arrived at the rocks, some of them landed, the rest being left to take care of the boat. And suddenly, a heavy wind came on, and the latter was forced to leave the island in haste. And as the sea became dangerous and the surf beat furiously upon the cliff, all those who had landed were unable to reach the boat in time at the signal from their companions. Except one, a young and active man who, having gone in his zeal higher and farther than the others, was longer in getting down to the beach again. By the time he did get down there, the waves were so high that those in the water, those in the boat wrought their best to save him. They could not get near enough to him, and so were compelled for their own lives' sake to row to shore. They determined, however, when the storm should abate its fury, to return to the rocks and rescue him, knowing that unless they did so, and the wind were soon spent, the youth could not but perish from cold and hunger. Often then they tried to row to Geirfus Glacier, but the whole season through they were unable to approach them, as the wind and surf drove them back. At last, deeming the young man dead, they gave up the attempt and ceased to risk their lives in seas so wrathful. So time passed, and until the next season for seeking seabirds came around. And the weather being now calm, the peasants embarked in their boat for Geirfuglaskir. When they landed upon the cliffs, great was their astonishment at seeing come towards them a man, for they thought no one could live in so wild and waste a spot. And when the man drew near them, they recognized him as the youth who had been left there the year before, and whom they had long ago given up as lost. Their wonder knew no bounds, and they guessed that he had the elves to thank for his safety. Well, they asked him all sorts of questions. What had he lived upon? Where had he slept at night? What had he done for fire in the winter? And so forth. But he would give them none but vague replies, which left them just as wise as they were before. He said, however, he had never once left the cliff, and that he'd been very comfortable there, wanting for nothing. They then rowed him to land, where all his friends and kin received him with unbounded amazement and joy, but question him as they would, could get but mighty little out of him concerning his life on the cliffs the whole year through. With time, the strangeness of this event and the wonder it had awakened passed away from the men's minds, and it was little, if at all, spoken of. One Sunday in the summer, certain things that took place in the church at Kilvalnes filled people with astonishment. There were large numbers there, and among them the young man who passed a year at the cliffs of Geirfuglaskir. When the service was over and the folk began to leave the church, what should they find standing in the porch but a beautiful cradle with a baby in it? The coverlet was richly embroidered and wrought of a stuff that nobody had ever seen before, but the strangest part of the business was that though everybody looked at the cradle and child, nobody claimed it either, one or the other, or seemed to know anything whatsoever about it. Last of all came the priest out of the church, who, after he had admired and wondered at the cradle and child as much as the others, asked whether no one person present to whom they belonged, but no one answered. And then he asked whether there was no one present who had enough interest in the child to desire him to baptize it. No one either answered nor came forward. And at this moment the priest happened to cast his eyes on the young peasant concerning whose sojourn on the, that's an English word I should be able to say, Geirfuglaskir rocks, he had always felt particularly suspicious, and calling him aside asked him whether he had any idea who its father was and whether he would like the child baptized. But the youth, turning angrily towards him, declared that he knew nothing whatsoever about the child or its father. "What care I," he said, "whether you baptize the child or no? Christen it, drown it, just which you think fit. Neither it nor its father nor its mother are aught to me." And as these words left his their lips suddenly appeared in the porch a woman handsomely apparelled, of great beauty and noble stature, whom no one had ever seen before, and she snatched the coverlet from the cradle, and flinging it in through the door of the church, said, "Be witness all, that I wish not the church to lose its dues for this child's baptism." Then turning to the young peasant and stretching out her hands towards him, "But thou, O faithless coward, disowner of the child, shalt become a whale, the fiercest and most dreaded in the whole wide sea." And with these words she seized the cradle and disappeared. The priest, however, took the coverlet which she had flung into the church and made of it an altar cloth, the handsomest that had ever been seen. As for the young peasant, he went mad on the spot, rushing down to Holmir cliffs, which rise sheer from the deep water, and made as if he would throw himself from them. But while he hesitated for a moment on the brink, lo, a fearful change came over him, and he began to swell to a vast size, till at last he became so large that the rock could no longer bear him, and crumbling beneath them, hurled him down into the sea. There he was changed into a great whale, and the red cap which he'd been wearing became a red head. After this, the mother confessed that her son had spent the year with the elves upon Geirfuglaskir, and on this being left on the rocks by his companions, so he had declared to her, he had at first wandered about in despair, filled only with the thought of throwing himself into the waves to die a speedy death, rather than suffer all the pangs of hunger and cold. But that a lovely girl had come to him, telling him she was an elf, and had asked him to spend the winter with her. She had borne him a child before the end of the year and allowed him to go to shore when his companions came again to the cliffs on one condition, that he would have this child baptized when he should find it in the church porch, threatening him, if he failed in the fulfillment of this, with the severest punishment and the most hapless fate. Now Redhead, the whale, took up his abode in Faxafjord and wrought mischief there without end, destroying boats innumerable and drowning all their crews to the last man. And so that at last it became unsafe to cross any part of the bay, and nothing could either prevent his ravages nor drive him away. And after matters had gone on like this for some time, the whale began to haunt a narrow gulf between Akranes and Kirtlinus, which is now called after him Kvalfjorda. At that time there lived Sirbora at Kvalfjord Strand, an aged priest who through hail and hearty was blind. He had 2 sons and a daughter who were all in the flower of their youth, and who were their father's hope and stay, and as it were the very apple of his eye. His sons were in the habit of fishing Kvalfjorda, and one day when they were out they encountered the whale, Redhead, who overthrew their boat and drowned them. And when their father heard of their death and how it had been brought about, he was filled with grief, but uttered not a word at the time. Now it must be known that this priest was well skilled in all magical arts. Not long after this, one fine morning in the summer, he bade his daughter take his hand and guide him down to the seashore. When he arrived there, he planted the end of the staff which he brought with him in the waves, and leaning on the handle, fell into deep thought. After a few moments, he asked his daughter, "How looks the sea?" "My father, it is as bright and as smooth as a mirror," she answered. Again, a few minutes, and he repeated, "How looks the sea?" And she replied, "I see on the horizon a black line, which draws nearer and nearer, as if it were a shoal of whales, swimming quickly into the bay." And when the old man heard that the black line was approaching them, he bade the girl lead him along the shore, towards the inlay end of the bay, and she did so. And the black surging sea followed them constantly. But as the water became shallower, the girl saw that the foam arose not from a shoal of whales, as she had thought at first, but from the swimming of a single, huge whale with a red head, who came rapidly towards them along the middle of the bay, as if drawn by some unseen power. A river ran into the extreme end of the gulf, and the old priest begged his daughter to lead him still along its banks. As they went slowly up the stream, the old man feeling every footstep before him, the whale followed them, though with a heavy struggle, as the river contained but little water for so vast a monster to swim in. Yet forward they went, and the whale still after them, till the river became so narrow between its high walls of rock that the ground beneath their feet quaked as the whale followed them. And after a while they came to a waterfall, upon which the monster leaped with a spring that made the land tremble far and wide, and the very rocks totter. But they came at last to a lake, from which the river arose, whose course they had followed from the sea, Lake Kvalten. And here the heart of the monster broke from the very toil and anguish, and he disappeared from their eyes. And when the old priest returned home, after having charmed the whale thus to his death, all the people from far and near thanked him for having rid the coast of so dread a plague. And in case anybody should doubt the truth of this story of Redhead, the man whale, he may as well say that the shores on the Lake Kvalten, mighty whale bones were found lying after the date of this tale. Lizzie Rose says, serves him right. Indeed, it does. Jumpstore says, well, that's not fair. What did the whale do wrong? Well, two things. It's a boy who cheated the elf of a promise, and he also killed the entire family except for the daughter of the priest. Lizzie Rose says, is this the same priest as before? I bet it is. It might be. I mean, that's kind of how tales of, like, St. Valentine's and St. Patrick go. All right. Well, look at that. We made a normal time. I can't believe I thought I was going to do this last episode as well. Sometimes my sense of time is way off. Yeah, Lizzie Rose says the whale didn't claim the child. Exactly. Cursed himself. All right. Well, there are some more stories about elves in Icelandic lore. A mixed bag, but I would say that as far as, like, I find that a lot of, like, the German fae and even the Celtic fae are like, I don't even understand what they want from us. But with the Icelandic, it's always pretty clear. And in general, they seem to be pretty good-natured as long as you keep your promises, except for that one tale we read about them brutally killing a man for just bursting into their ceremony. Yeah. And I guess that kind of summarizes my discussion of Icelandic elves for a little bit. I don't really have much to add on that. I don't know which story chat enjoyed the most, but you can let me know. If you enjoyed this, though, there is an entire playlist of it called Fireside Fairytales. I also have some themed playlists. There's one that's all Halloween stuff from my many years of Halloween shows. And then there's one that's all Christmas stuff from my many years of Christmas shows. Or winter, or whatever. Or there's just one of all of them, if you want to watch those. But nonetheless, I won't belabor you too much because I don't have much more to add. If you do want to join the stream again, if you just enjoy the company here and whatever else, on Thursdays we do the Varietal Show, which is where we use solo tabletop RPGs to write stories. Yeah, I think we had a good time with, especially this last month. We've had a lot of really good games. I did want to add, I'll bring it up again on Thursday, but I noticed that Troves is having a Kickstarter to get a physical copy. I wonder if that's reason enough for me to just make the next stream us designing a Trove. I know it's not gonna do very well, and I don't want to scare people off, but because I know that because when we did Hexcrawl, when we made those characters, like Hexcrawl did quite well, and then we made monsters for Hexcrawl together, and nobody liked that except for me. Zombie Wolf says it's not letting me post my trivia. Oh no! I wish I could tell you which one it was. GS says Demons of the Sea was a great one. That's a good point. That was a Halloween one. That was probably if you like the storm stories, it's not really folklore per se, but it's the guy who inspired Lovecraft. I read a couple of stories from him probably 2 years ago on Halloween, or in October anyways. But yes. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining the stream and giving me a watch. I hope you enjoyed yourself tonight. Thank you to everybody in chat. And of course, Janera and Uncle Kitty for lurking on later. We always miss you, and we hope you're doing well. I'll keep the fire warm. you have yourself a good sleep.